Hello and good evening. This is our August 2020 live stream, and today we'll be talking about the Multimixer node that our patrons voted to be developed this month. Now, the basic idea behind the Multimixer node is to have a node that works in a way that's similar to the Morph Mixer. So in this case, this is just a super simple sample scene. In this case, it's just a primitive sphere. And in my surfaces, and this looks a bit messy, I do have a bunch of materials. And they all pipe into the material multi-switcher, which, the multi-mixer, there we go. And the idea is that you can use all these materials, which is a principal BSDF, car paint, dielectric, conductor, and a skin down here. I just did this for testing. They're just using default settings. You pipe them into your surface, and if I render now, it is going to be completely black because all the weights for the inputs are set to 0. So if I set the first one to 100%, that's just a blue BSDF, then it's just going to essentially make the output 100% the first material. What I can do now is set the second material to 100% as well, and it's going to average between the first and second material. The other ones at 0% aren't going to affect this at all. And I can continue on and mix something else in. Having said that, with the materials, you can't really mix more than 2 or 3 before things get very messy. So if I turn these two off, you will see that it's I think a dielectric in this case. This one should be the car paint. No, not this one. This one. Oh no, that's the skin. And you can use this, for example, to make a material that's like 50% your base BSDF and 100% skin. Having said that, materials are probably not the main use case for this. And just to show you how the node works in general, I'll just turn off rendering, open up the node editor, and just for now, just erase everything because none of this is needed, to give you an idea of how this works. Actually, let's keep it like this. Add a BSDF material. There we go. Hook that up. And if I render now, I've just got a default surface. On the left side here, I've got 3 nodes that create a color. And this is just, I've got something to play with. And if you go to db&w mixer, you will find that there is 3 kinds of mixers. There's a vector multimixer, a scalar multimixer, and a material multimixer. The vector multimixer also works with colors because internally a vector is just 3 float values and a color is also 3 float values, so it's the same thing. And there was an idea to make like a universal multimixer where the first connection that you create defines the other connection types that you can use. But since the switcher down here also is based on these 3 connection types, I've decided to create the mixer the same way as well. And since I see many people on the chat, hi Sukutsu, hi Marie, hi Steph, and hi Andrew. Nice to see you in the chat. And I'm glad you made it. All right, so how do you use it? You add the node, And it doesn't look like much. It doesn't have any inputs except for this new input. Since this is a vector multimixer, it already has a vector output. And user interface only shows one button, which is called additive. And I'll go into that later. So what you can do, and that's working already, you can just take some outputs and hook them up to the multimixer, and it creates an input in the vector multimixer and a corresponding percentage input, which allows you to weigh that input. And I can add some more here. There we go. And this is something I'm actually quite proud of. The interface on the right-hand side updates as you hook up new values, which isn't quite that easy to do in using the Lightwave SDK. Hi, Jason. Hi, Lowfish. Well, if it's your first time, then a special welcome to you. I'm glad you could make it. All right, so basically you hook things up to the new input here. That creates the new inputs, hooks up the values, and creates the percentages on the right. As you can see, the name of the inputs as well as the name of the entries here is determined by the names of the outputs that you connect to it. And if you think that's not something you can really work with, what you can do is you can right-click. In the node menu, you have the option to rename an input. So I can, there we go, I can rename the first one to red, the second one to green, and the third one to blue. And one thing you might notice, not only does it update the name of the input here and the connection remains, but it also renames the percentage envelope on the user interface right away without having to close it and open it again. Also, one thing that happened behind the scenes is if you click on the envelope button, you will notice that the envelope is also called, vector multimixer blah 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 dot red. So this name is also used to name the envelope in the graph editor. All right, so we have 3 inputs connected to our vector multimixer, and I'm going to take the output of that and put that into the color of the principled BSDF. And let's just have a look at the render. And you will notice, yeah, it's black. That's because the red, green, and blue input are all set to 0%. So you can start weighing them, give the red 100%. If you want some more green, you can give it 100% as well. So basically what it does is it takes all the current percentage values, adds them up, then normalizes them to be 100% and scales down the other weights respectively. So if you set everything to 100%, that's 300% divided by 3 is 33. So each one of these weights is actually 33%, and that adds up to 100%. Well, I've had crashes with our plugins, so. All right. Now the odd thing that you see here is if they're all at 100% and they're red, green, and blue, you get some gray, but that's kind of expected. But it's not pure white. It's like 50% gray or something like that. All right. Also, one thing that works, if like I set the red to 100%, I have a sphere that's 100% red. If I crank it up to 500%, it's still going to be the same. So you cannot multiply everything to a value above 100%, with one exception, and that's the additive button. So if you have additive on, then it's actually not going to average the values, but it's going to multiply the red by whatever percentage it is and then add it to the green multiplied by whatever percentage that has, and then add it to the blue multiplied by whatever percentage that is. So if I turn everything to 100% now, I'm going to get pure white because I've got 100% green plus 100% blue plus 100% red, which is white. If I turn the additive off, it's going to take the average, and that's where you get the gray. There are two things I've been kind of struggling with, because as far as I'm concerned, this is, I mean, it's working, and it's working the way it's supposed to. One usability issue is that in the Multimixer, you have these nice sliders. And I did actually think about adding sliders here as well, so you can, use them to shift your percentage values. The problem with that is sliders are based on integers, not on float numbers, which is something I could work around with. But there is no direct access to the envelopes behind them, to this part. So for basically setting keys and stuff like that would essentially depend on the auto key method that you have active here. And then you would essentially have for every input one line of the percentage text control box with the mini slider and the envelope button, and underneath it like a horizontal slider that takes half of the user interface. And then green would still be the same thing, plus a slider underneath it, and blue as well. And to be fair, I wasn't really happy about that approach, even though it would give you this, let's use some sliders to mix something together feeling. One option would be to have tabs, where you have like one tab that shows you this kind of user interface, and the other tab just shows you sliders. But still, there wouldn't be a way to indicate if a slider is currently on a keyframe. You couldn't actually directly delete keyframes either, because there's no controls for that. So yeah, that would make things a bit more tricky, I suppose, to work with. So the user interface isn't quite the same as the Multimixer, but the functionality is there. And the second thing, and that's something I will add, as you can see, if you add an input, like in this case, the red color, it adds an input to the node. But the weight of the input is determined by the setting in the user interface. There's no way to control the weight of every input using nodes. So one thing that is going to happen is that if you add a new input, let's just add another color. Where is it? No, it's constants, isn't it? Up there. There we go. Let's just add one more constant color. So one thing that is going to change is as soon as you add a new input, underneath that input there is going to be a second input, which is a scalar, which will allow you to change the weight of that input. And if that is connected, then the respective percentage input here is going to be ghosted. So that way you have the option of either controlling the weights of the different inputs using the interface, or using other nodal inputs, so you could texture them. And yeah, I'm gonna quickly show you something, but and Dagmar is going to hate me for this. It's going to require a small recompile, but it's not that bad because it's just taking a comment that I made out. If I find it. Yeah, there we go. It's 2 comments. So let's just shut this down and quickly compile. Also, if you have any questions, Um, I'm happy to answer them if I can. Yeah, the weight input is a must. Well, I'm not coding. I'm just removing comments and recompiling. That's not coding. All right. Let's open the same sample scene again. Go to the node editor. And yeah, that's the original mess, but this is the one I'm interested in. So what you see here is an earlier phase of where I actually thought about playing with, using sliders. The downside is if I use sliders, I either get this or I get this with like a text box next to it, where I can show a number. But that's it. There's no envelope controls. There's no, right-click controls to set or remove a keyframe. There's no way to change the color when you're on a keyframe. All you have is essentially a slider that goes from 0 to 100%. And yeah, that's not really a solution I like. Because it's just too limited. On the one side, it would give you a nice visual feedback to see how the percentages kind of relate to each other. I mean, this would be like 25, 50, and 100%. So you actually see at a glance how the inputs are weighed. But that's all there is to it. I mean, actually working with those sliders, I don't think that's a very useful thing. So I'm decided against them. Um, multiply could work. So it would essentially be take the color, multiply it by the weight, which is what's happening in either way, and then multiply it by the next result, which is the next color multiplied by the weight. I can certainly add that, yeah. Let me just write that down. The downside of that is things are going to get darker. Or basically, the downside of the multiply is this. If the weight of any of the input values is 0%, then the result is going to be 0. So for a multiply to work, all of the weight percentages have to be above 0%. So you can't really say, okay, I want to mix the first two with a multiply, but ignore the third, because the fact that the third is at 0 is going to zero the whole result. So I'm not sure if that really works out the way it should. And I'm gonna say no for now. You might be able to check if a value is weight value is 0% and then just ignore that. But I'm not actually sure if it's gonna give you results that you expect. Or you'll enter some values and look at it and say, what the is going on? I don't know. I don't know what it's doing. Yeah, but it would do the same thing even for other uses. Whenever the weight of any one of those values is 0, then the whole result is 0. So, for example, if you want to take some displacement maps, morph maps, and mix them together with that, as soon as the weight of any one of these morph maps is 0, and you have a multiplicative mode, then the result is 0 every time. Yeah, so I can't really think of a use case for that. But yeah, I'll think about it. So yeah, the only thing why I like these sliders is because they actually give you like a visual clue on what the weights are like. But as an interface to work with, they are just way too limited, at least in this context. So yeah, they're gonna go again. But that's just undoing changes in my code and recompiling. And done. So yeah, so basically the change that's left to do is to add the individual weight inputs and evaluate them. Do all the various sorts of inputs, work with the multimixer and the final nodes. To be fair, there isn't that many that we can actually evaluate. If you, let me just load that scene again. There's many that where it doesn't actually make any sense. So currently it is limited to, where is it? Okay, material, scalar, and vector. Vectors also cover colors. Scalars also cover integers, and material is just specialized for materials. And if I look at the SDK, which is, come on. Let me just find the right bit of code. There we go. Okay. So this is the Lightwave SDK. And here you have the actual connection types that are available for nodes. RGB, obviously we have. Scalar, we've got that. We are covering vector, which is the same as RGB. Integer is covered. Function isn't covered, but that's because function is something that's used very, very differently. So it can't be mixed by the concept goes against it. Projection. Let me just check. Yeah, the problem is that projection contains so many different variables that make up the whole projection itself, that mixing those would always give you a result that doesn't help. The same is true for the matrix connection type, which hardly anybody uses anyways. But the problem with the matrix is that if you just mix matrices like that, you're not going to get a useful result. That's just not how mathematical matrices work. BSDF, that's the material, that's working, but that required custom code. That works differently than just adding up values. The Fresnel is something I've actually never come across as a connection. I'm not sure if that would work at all. And volume is also something where the whole mixing in a simple fashion like this just wouldn't work. And I'm actually not even sure how much of that is exposed in the SDK. So yeah, and the custom ones, like some of the Octane connections, since nobody knows what's actually hidden behind those as data, there's just no way to mix that data in any meaningful way either. So essentially, the ones that can be mixed are the only ones, or the ones that the node supports at the moment are the only ones that can be mixed in a meaningful way. The same is true for the multi-switcher, by the way, because that does some mixing as well. Yeah, there's a few math matrix things, but even those are fairly limited, I think. I think there's two or three that support it. So yeah, that's really all there is to say about it. Get the individual weight inputs, um, and then make sure that the renaming works and stuff like that, and that will be that release. Um, there's two things I can do. I can either send you this over the weekend, or send the version with the weights early next week, and I think that makes more sense. So that you have kind of a final version to work with, and then get back to me if it actually does crash. And yeah, I think I still have a crash when exiting Lightwave, although I'm not sure if that's one of those nodes or something else. But that's something to fix also. Yeah, I mean, there's parts in the SDK. In many cases, you just have a connection and you know what kind of connection type it is, but you have no clue what data is actually being transferred. So if you don't know what data is, you can't really mix it in any way either. But I do think this by itself is quite useful already, especially if you think about being able to mix something like displacement maps, I mean morph maps, and then actually process the result of that afterwards in a nodal graph, which is a bit tricky to do with the built-in morph mixer. Although the morph mixer is obviously nicer to animate. Yeah, it does here as well, and many times I'm actually not sure if it's my nodes or if it isn't my nodes or my code. I suspect sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but it's random. Yeah, if it crashes, then it should crash when you exit Lightwave and not before that. Absolutely. So yeah, um, that's really all there is to show for this week. Oh, for this month actually, or well, for this stream. Um, also, if you have any requests, please join our Discord and post something there, or just comment everywhere on our Patreon page, because we actually read those comments and we even reply to them. Um, as a friendly reminder, on our YouTube channel, if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe. Once we reach 100 subscribers, we'll actually be able to use our own URL for the channel. Yay! And one thing that was discussed on Discord is a request for a plugin that's going to help with wheel rotation. And that is likely to be something that's going to show up next month in the poll for the plugin of the month. Because it seems while there are some solutions, many of them don't really work the way they should, or don't work anymore, or require lots of workarounds or scripting and stuff like that. So yeah, it's very likely that a wheel rotation plugin, or maybe a node and a motion plugin, are going to be something to choose from next month. I really like that idea, and there's a few things I can think of that could make it unique, like maybe cache the rotation in memory, like internal baking, stuff like that. So yeah, that's very likely to be on the to-do list. So yeah, I'm sorry that there wasn't that much more to show. I only have this one test scene, and yeah, I've shown it to all of you already. The tricky part, I have to admit, was getting the multi-mixer work properly for the materials, but that's because the material part of the SDK is a bit tricky to use because the way you evaluate inputs and outputs on the node almost reverses, and you have to use a very different logic to think about how you use the inputs and the outputs. Basically, normally for something like a color, I get the values from the inputs, which are just 3 floating point values for every input, add them up, and then send them to the output. However, if you deal with a BSDF or material, you basically first get the output and then modify that, and then you're done. So it's a very different way of working with them. You mean the node? The problem with the fog filter is almost a running gag. We probably should make it a bonus plugin for Christmas or something. The problem with nodes drawing anything in display space, or something like in the case of a rotation node, is that you would actually want to see the radius in context to or in relation to the item that the node's actually being applied to. And then you get to the old problem that nodes actually don't know what they're applied to until they're evaluated. And some nodes could be applied or evaluated on multiple different items. So first of all, they have to wait until they've been evaluated to know which item they have been applied to. And then if it's multiple items, which one should they draw the radius on? If it's something like a straight motion modifier, that could draw the radius on basically itself. But for something like a node, it's a lot trickier because it can be evaluated in multiple contexts, at least theoretically. Earlier, when Lightwave had the ability to have the same surface in multiple items, that happened a lot. It doesn't happen that much anymore, but still, if you have multiple layers in an object, these will load in as different items, but they can still have the same node applied to all of them because they have the same surface on the same LWO. Also, if you use something like NodeMeister, you can also have the same node run on different items. And yeah, that makes the whole drawing thing very tricky. So yeah, so much for would be cool if it drew the radius in display space. Sometimes it's not as easy as it sounds or should be. All right, so yeah, on that note, I'm sorry there isn't that much more to show or to talk about for now, unless you have another question. Yeah, but then you have the problem. Andrew asks maybe if it could use the cached points for drawing, or the cached item IDs for drawing. But that means that you have to keep a list of item IDs, make sure that they don't change, or if an item ID changes, that you update them. And also, it basically slows down every single evaluation because it could happen in multiple threads. So every evaluation has to check if the current item is in that list. And if it's not in that list, it has to add it. And all of this checking the list and adding to the list isn't multi-threading safe. So just checking if an item is in a list would make that part of the evaluation code for the node not thread safe, which means you have to lock it, which slows down evaluations massively. So yeah, things like that can be a pain. Yeah, I know. It's an obvious idea, and it's like, yeah, why doesn't it draw the radius? But then you look at the realities of how the SDK works, how things work behind the scenes, and all of a sudden you're dealing with multi-threading and locking different threads and stuff like that. Well, if Marie says we have to catch our weekend, then I suppose we have to. So thanks a lot for joining us. I hope you're all safe out there. Um, I hope you're not too hot. We've cooled down a little. And as always, join us on Discord. Thanks a lot to each and every patron for supporting us. That's much appreciated, especially nowadays. And we will catch you later this month after you get your preview build for the Q&A session. And I'll make sure to send you a preview build of containing the vector multimixer early next week. So, thanks a lot and bye-bye.